Hi everyone, I'm here today with Zeta Yarwood, one of the leading executive career coaches and NLP life coaches in the Middle East. Zeta helps people identify what they want out of life and how to get it. And one of the reasons I'm actually here today doing the video series is because Zeta helped me identify what I wanted to do, and one of those things was to inspire people. So today I'm here to inspire you with Zeta's remarkable story of how she endured redundancy not once but twice in her life, and how that led her to become the successful career coach she is today with over 200,000 followers on LinkedIn. Hello, Zeta, my friend. How are you? Because you are my friend.
We are now, indeed. Thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
No, it's all my pleasure to have you here. I'm so pleased that you've come to share your story. I mentioned that you were made redundant, not just once, but twice. So would you mind just sharing your story briefly on how that happened?
Okay, so the first time I was made redundant, so that was in 2008, and I had just started a brand new job in June. So I was working as a recruitment consultant in financial services, and everything was going really well. The market was booming. The rest of the world was in the middle of the economic crisis, right? So people were kind of phoning us and saying, can we come and work in Dubai? We've heard that the market is great over there. And we were like, yeah, come to the land of milk and honey. Everything's great. And then in September, Lehman Brothers went down. And then obviously that's when the crisis hit Dubai, and it hit Dubai really, really hard. So for about 6 months, I was trying desperately to find jobs for people and trying to just pick up jobs where I could. But every time I spoke to a company, they were literally laughing in my face, like, oh, are you joking? We're not hiring right now. And then it got to March, and we came into the office, and I remember this day so clearly. Came to the office and we sat down, and my boss, the managing director, just sort of stood up, and he said, right, everyone, we've got a company meeting, everyone in the boardroom right now. So we went in there, and he said, there's no sugarcoating this. Today I'm going to be letting some of you go.
Oh.
And so we all just looked at each other and we were like, oh gosh, here we go. And anyway, I was one of those people. So that was in March, and yeah, that was pretty tough. And then the second time I got made redundant, that was 2014. So that wasn't necessarily anything to do with the market. That was more of a company restructure. So my boss at the time, the managing director, quit. And my role became redundant as a result of his quitting. So yeah, I got made redundant that time as well.
I mean, I laugh, but it's actually so, because you're laughing now, I guess, looking back, you can kind of smile about it, because it's such a weird thing to happen. But obviously, when it happened, how did you feel? Because the funny thing is, I've read that you've said redundancy was like the best thing that ever happened to you. But I'm guessing that's not how you initially felt. So how did you kind of, change? Like, what made you change your view on redundancy? And
yeah, great question. So you're absolutely right. When it happened, it was the worst feeling that I'd ever experienced in my life. So I would love to be able to say that when my boss told me that I was being made redundant, I handled it with all of the dignity and grace in the world, but that would be an absolute lie. There were tears. Probably a little bit of snot somewhere. It was just, I was begging, negotiating, bartering, trying to keep my job. It wasn't the most graceful thing I've ever done. And I would say the first 2 months after that, the emotional roller coaster was horrendous. The stress, anxiety, your whole survival is under threat. It wasn't just about being made redundant. It was about being made redundant in a job scarce market. Right, so it's not like I've just been made redundant, I can go and find another job. It was I've just been made redundant and nobody is hiring. So now your whole survival is under threat. So I think the first 2 months was the hardest, and then weirdly, and I think for me it was just a very natural process. You just kind of move into this mode of acceptance. It is what it is. There's nothing that you can do about it, and the thing about acceptance is once you accept it, the stress comes down. And when you stop being stressful, you suddenly have clarity of thought. And so all of a sudden, you just have space to think about things. You have, what do I want to do with my life? What meaning do I want to give to all of this, etc. So when it's sort of being the best thing that ever happened to me at the time, no. In hindsight, yes. because it gave me the freedom and the flexibility and the time to really think about what it is that I wanted to do with my life. And I sort of came to the realization that up until that point, the career choices that I had made hadn't necessarily been things that I'd wanted to do, more things that I think I should be doing. And as a result of that, when I really sat down to think about what it is that I want to do, that's when I really started to think about coaching and careers and helping people to kind of get unstuck. My degree was in psychology, so I automatically thought I could go back to psychology. But it was going to be about another 5 years worth of study. I couldn't afford the university fees going back full time, but coaching seemed like another option. I didn't become a coach straight away. It wasn't a case of being made redundant, now I'm going to start coaching. It was a really long, drawn out journey from going to where I was to where I am now, in the sense of I discovered what it is that I wanted to do, but financially I wasn't in a good enough position to just start my own business. I had to go back into full-time employment. I had to build up a financial cushion. Yes. That whole process, getting training, getting qualified, building up the financial cushion, building up the courage, all of those things. Yeah, that was a good, I would say, 4-year period.
It takes a lot of time to kind of, especially to get to where you have today, so that's completely understandable.
Yeah.
It sounds like, redundancy did help you kind of almost find your purpose, let's say. Were there any other lessons that you took away from it?
How long have we got?
Your top 3 or...
I think there were some really interesting ones. I think one of them was around the concept of ego. I recognised that a lot of the career choices that I'd made going into recruitment, choosing recruitment, was more about what will people think of me rather than what do I want, what's fulfilling to me. I think, when I got made redundant from a job that I didn't even enjoy, I had to ask myself the question of how did I get here? And the realization is that I'd listened to my ego. And I really, instead of listening to my heart, I'd listened to that, and I ended up in a job that I didn't even enjoy. And then when I actually got made redundant, the shame that I felt and the embarrassment and the humiliation, it made me realize that I had an ego, and it made me realize that a lot of my self-worth and validation came from my job and what people thought of me in my job. And so there was a lot of affirmation from people's opinions of what kind of job I had, etc. So there was a realization that, one, I am not my job. What my job is completely separate to who I am as a person. But two, even when I lost my job, the people who were really important to me still stayed in my life, right? So it wasn't like, oh, you've lost your job, we don't want to know you anymore. It was, hey, you've lost your job, so what? Like, we still love you.
You still had your friends, your family.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that was definitely there. You become very grateful in that moment. I mean, just things that I took for granted, having a UK passport, having enough money to pay for the rent and the bills, like enough savings. Like those things you just kind of take for granted. But I had savings, I had a UK passport. Yeah. Like, that gave me a little bit more power to stay in Dubai. It also meant that I had the freedom to go home to a developed country, so that if I needed to go home, I could, and I would have a roof over my head. I would be taken care of. I had unemployment benefits, all of these things that a lot of other people just don't have that privilege, right? So I was very, very grateful in that moment. So instead of sort of focusing on everything that I lost, I really became incredibly grateful for what I had. And I think also lessons in terms of humility, the gift of time. I think, when I talk to a lot of my clients, they say, oh, I really want to figure out my life, I just don't have time.
Yeah.
I just don't have time. I don't have time to figure out my life, right? So in being made redundant, I had time.
Yeah.
And with that time, I was actually able to turn my life around.
So it's kind of like your silver lining,
oh, yeah,
in a way. Obviously, you were very fortunate. You said you had a lot of options, and there are a lot of other people, particularly in the strange period that we are today with COVID-19, that have been made redundant, or if they haven't been made redundant yet, they're fearful that it might happen at some stage. If you could give them any advice, what would it be? So,
being made redundant is something that we either will experience or we will face potentially, right? It's just almost like a given, particularly in the market that we're at now. It's not necessarily about the redundancy, it's about how we respond to the redundancy. It's our response to the redundancy that will determine the result of that redundancy. So if you respond to redundancy in such a way that you view it like it's the most scariest thing in the world, you will be fearful of it, meaning that you will be super stressed, you'll be under a lot of pressure to either keep your job or under a huge amount of pressure to quickly find a job, whatever that is. And when you're under pressure and when you're under stress, you don't necessarily make the best decisions. So if you're fearful of redundancy or you've just been made redundant, the first thing to focus on is actually get clear on your relationship with redundancy. Give it a better meaning. Give it a meaning that allows you to at least feel neutral about it. If you're feeling anxious or angry or frustrated, or you feel like it's a massive injustice, you're going to feel bad. And those emotions are going to determine how you respond to it, how you behave, how you perform at work, in an interview, etc. So if you can at least look at it in a way that you can feel neutral about it, that's better than feeling angry or upset about it. Yeah. If you can look at it in such a way that you can start to see, well, how might this be an opportunity? Then you start to notice shifts in terms of, I'm feeling a little bit more motivated right now. I'm feeling a little bit more confident right now. I'm feeling a little bit more inspired right now. And those emotions will serve you so much better. You'll be able to perform much better in interviews. You'll feel much more motivated in your job search. You'll perform better at work. So it's not necessarily about trying to avoid the redundancy. I mean, yes, if you can, great, but you have no control over that. The only thing that you can control is how you respond to it. So if you can manage that as best as you can, fantastic. The other thing that I would say is, for those of you who are really concerned, and for those of you who do require a certain degree of certainty and safety, get ready for it just in case. Get your CV ready, get your LinkedIn profile ready, brush up on your interview skills, build your network, nourish your existing network, do all of those kind of mitigating steps. And just purely if that will provide you with some degree of psychological safety, do that as well.
That's great advice. So be prepared and also try to change your reaction or your response.
Yeah.
Zeta, thank you so much for sharing your story. I would like to invite you back on next week's video to talk more about how you've used LinkedIn to kind of create your personal brand, because you've had a lot of success on the social media platform, and maybe you can share some tips on how we can also start to use the platform more effectively.
Sure, that'd be great.
Perfect. Thank you, Zeta, and thank you everyone for watching.